We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's April 26th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Chiji.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, and Im Sang-hyuk.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Just 2 days into its release, the Korean crime action movie, The Roundup Punishment, has had over 1 million moviegoers. If the fourth edition of the series hits 10 million, it will be the third movie to achieve this feat. As of Thursday morning, 94% of all ticket reservations have been for The Roundup Punishment. Around 724,000 tickets have been reserved. Moving on, along with the Environment Ministry's vision to go zero waste, 16 franchises in Korea have decided to no longer give out disposables to customers unless they request for them separately. As of Thursday, 16 franchises, including popular chicken brand BBQ, voluntarily signed a contract with the Environment Ministry, promising to no longer give out paper cups, wipes, or aprons to customers. From 2018, officials have been looking to secure contracts with fast food chains and cafes to cut down on the amount of plastic goods or disposables used. And 4 out of 10 people in their 20s and 30s in Korea said they feel the most financially strained when paying for housing. That's according to a popular real estate and property search app called Tabang, which surveyed more than 1,500 young Korean adults. Half of those surveyed were paying for rent monthly, and when asked what they wanted to do about this financial burden, around 31% said they were thinking of moving to a cheaper housing option. And the specific survey found out that many young people paid rent in monthly installments, and experts analyzed this to be because monthly rent being is more affordable and a better alternative to the jeonse deposit system, mainly because, as we've covered before on NewsGen, there has been a high percentage of young tenants who have been scammed through jeonse. And jeonse is a Korean concept where a housing rental system, instead of paying monthly installments to a landlord, a large lump sum payment is deposited throughout the duration of one's contract. Now, I would like to ask our panelists here in the studio, can you relate to the latest figure of how paying for housing is the most strenuous in terms of finance?
Well, it is totally understandable that many youths are actually opting for a monthly payment system rather than jeonse. Well, and as you mentioned, the massive scam crisis targeting youth has been actually the culprit for all this. And furthermore, with the economic downturn, housing prices are skyrocketing every day this year. So if you log into any real estate app, you can see that monthly payment and jeonse actually have a significant gap when it comes to their price. So jeonse is much more higher than going for monthly payment. Now, what's even funnier here is that actually jeonse and the actual amount of buying your own house is not that much different. So if we think about the initial purpose of jeonse, it was actually for allowing the youth to pile up the seed money, and once the jeonse fee increases, then the youth can use those increased amount to buy their house of their own. But as you can see here, because the price of jeonse and buying your own house have not that much difference, I think that's why that more and more youth are rather just deciding to live in the monthly payment apartments or office towns like that.
Exactly, and I think a lot of relocation also plays a big variable because, for instance, we now see a lot of youth not staying at one particular job. A lot of people are hopping to different jobs, and as we mentioned yesterday in our commute time episode, we want to try living closer to our new workplace, which is why instead of doing jeonse where you have a longer contract, many are opting for monthly installments. Now, Chi, what are your thoughts on this story?
Well, I can relate very much because I'm one of the many young people living in Seoul who pay rent on a monthly basis. And experts have analyzed, like you said, that this is because it seems more affordable and safer than the traditional jeonse option, which I also agree and is the case with me as well. However, paying rent monthly seems like a waste of money in a way for me. So my plan is to get a low interest loan, which I thought initially wasn't easy for a freelancer. I'm sure Sang-hyuk will understand as well. But I found out that it was possible to get a pretty low interest loan as a freelancer as well, as long as I have some seed money saved up. Right. And so my plan is to move to a jeonse next year. So this way, although I will have to pay back the loan, the lump sum money will be mine in the end. So it's like saving up. But then I'll have to be extra careful because usually the safer jeonse options tend to be the less safe ones
Right.
where you can get into the scams. So I'll have to be careful.
I think you always just have to be attentive, meet a really good real estate agent, and make sure not to be scammed. But I think that's a great investment that you're planning out for, and we're rooting for you there. Now, switching gears to our main discussion topic of the day, today is April 26th. But around 4 years ago, we've actually seen, not more than 4, we're 6 years ago on April 27th, we saw an important turning point in inter-Korean relations. Then President of South Korea Moon Jae-in met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at an inter-Korean summit. And there, the two leaders declared a new era of peace to begin and sign a declaration at the Peace House at Panmunjom. In light of this day, we're going to look back at how relations between the two Koreas have unraveled since. And Chi, could you walk us through on how you remember April 27th, 2018? I remember we saw so many different headlines of the historic meetup
did.
between then President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. Do you remember that specific moment?
I do. I remember it very clearly. I mean, I'm sure you all do too. The leaders of two Koreas, they met for the first time after over a decade at the heavily fortified demilitarized zone village of Panmunjom. It was quite dramatic, the whole scene. I mean, smiling and holding hands. Then South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un were walking together after Kim walked across the inter-Korean border to shake hands with Moon. And as you saw in the VCR, I remember the blue background, which is the conference building of the United Nations Command military armistice. And it marked a striking contrast to the previous year's barrage of North Korean missile tests and its largest ever nuclear test that awoke fears of a fresh conflict on the Korean peninsula. So it was really a scenic, historic scene that we saw 6 years ago.
Exactly. Not only as a South Korean looking at the scene, but as a journalist, I was very surprised to see that North Korea and South Korea relations could have a turning point. But since then, we've seen Korean relations freeze up. Last week, the North Korean military announced that it had tested a super large cruise missile warhead and a new anti-aircraft missile along its western coast. And days after, earlier this week, the South Korean military suspected Pyongyang to have launched several short-range ballistic missiles as well. So we can see what used to be a little hope now turned into thorny relations. Would you like to elaborate?
Sure. So like you said, this historic scene of friendship we've seen wasn't maintained for too long. And North Korea has even blocked communication channels with South Korea for over a year now. And there's no indication that the blockade will be lifted anytime soon. And the North has declared the South a hostile state and continues to engage in activities that provoke armed conflict on the peninsula. And in the past, the North has actually cut the communication line several times when it was unhappy with what the South was doing. And Kim Jong-un has emphasized that he will not engage in talks with the South, stating that the relationship between the two countries is no longer one of kinship and homogeneity, but rather a relationship between two hostile countries at war. And Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, has also criticized, with her usual harsh rhetoric, the joint military drills South Korea carries out with the United States, and emphasized the North will continue to strengthen its military capabilities in response to these two allies.
Right, and Tanya, would you like to add on as to how difference in administration affects North Korea-South Korea relations?
Yeah, so usually when it comes to inter-Korean relationship, there is some kind of going back and forth depending on the parties and the ideology, whether the conservative or progressive taking the lead in the National Assembly. Now, it is clear that with the inauguration of the Yoon administration, South Korea is taking a hardline stance against the North and is trying to improve our relations with the US and Japan. Now, meanwhile, North is also building ties with countries like China and Russia. So you can see here the growing competition between the two sides forming trilateral relations. So President Yoon also stated, our government and military will never take any step back against the threats and provocations of the North during his speech on the West Sea Defense Day. And then he added, quote and unquote, compromising and acquiring fake peace will not actually protect the people of our country and rather exacerbate the security. So with that being said, there is a general prospect from the experts that the reopening of the liaison office will be suspended for some time. And also with the recent visit of the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, our government has already discussed matters regarding North Korea and ways to strengthen ties with the United States. So you can see here that there will be some tension going on the Korean Peninsula for now.
Right. For a few more months, I believe, we will see tensions build up even more because, as you mentioned, there seems to be a conclave between who's on whose side. We're seeing the U.S. and Japan strengthen its alliance with South Korea, whereas North Korea, for the first time, actually, it announced its plans to send its delegation to Iran and tighten its strength with Moscow. So we are seeing a divide there. But regardless of all these different news affairs or news about the inter-Korean relations, I do think our generation has quite a different perspective on how we view North Korea. We've mentioned a few times on News Generation that our generation, Millennials and Gen Z, seem to be focusing on the humanitarian issues and human rights crisis in North Korea at the moment. So would you like to elaborate on how young adults in Korea are perceiving North Korea and South Korea relations these days?
Sure. So the MZ generation were the ones who received education on unification between the two Koreas, which has helped them recognize the importance of reconciliation and cooperation over systemic competition with North Korea. They've been exposed to various sources of information about North Korea, what's happening within, including the recent inter-Korean exchanges. And the MZers view North Korean culture as one among many cultural contents, which makes them curious and interested in what it's like to be living in North Korea, such as their food as well. But they also criticize the ills of North Korean society, including the human rights issues, of course. And they hold a positive attitude towards North Korean defectors as well, who want to take risks, find a new life, and integrate into our society. I mean, I even have one or two close friends around me as well. And we've had James or Chongchul invited to our News Generation program before as well, who's also a North Korean defector.
And I think because we're seeing more content with North Korean defectors and then coming about and telling their story, not only about their defecting story or just life of how they're adjusting to South Korea, we are more exposed to what it would be like if we see relations mend. Now, Sang-Hyuk, would you like to add on as to how our generation is perceiving inter-Korea relations these days?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, many millennials and Gen Zs these days are actually taking pessimistic views against the inter-Korean relationship. So they do strongly believe that there will be a military tension on the Korean Peninsula due to the provocations from the north. Now, we have already discussed about this issue several times here in the News Gen, but according to the recent survey, you can see that more than 50% of the respondents said that it is questionable whether they should be the subject to bear the burden of national unification with their tax. So you can see here that many young adults are rather negative and pessimistic when it comes to national unification. However, on the other side, they do have this one consensus that in case the North Korean regime falls apart, they believe that South Korean government should take the lead and aim for national unification rather than just sitting idle by and watching other countries taking up the North, such as China.
So they're not necessarily for or as proactive in opting for reunification, but they're saying if time comes and if there's no other choice, it should be South Korea because we are brotherly nations there. Now we're going to hear from a North Korean defector on what he thinks about the latest peninsula issues. So stay tuned for our live interview. We're now going to hear from an author and leader of an inter-Korean organization. It's Cho Kyung-hil, who also defected from North Korea. Welcome, Kyung-hil.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Kyung-hil, before we start this interview, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? When did you first come to South Korea and why?
Well, I came to Korea in September 2004. After 3 attempts to defect, I succeeded finally. My hometown is Gyeonghung-gun, Hamgyong North Province. It is also widely known as ROG coal mine in South Korea. Also, life was very difficult in North Korea. I was born into an extremely ordinary family, but during the Aldous March, virtually everything fell apart. As the economic crisis hit, people were starving, and I went through it too. Because of this, I couldn't go to school. The only education I received in North Korea was up to the first grade of elementary school. I never learned anything, and all that mattered was just making a living. So I never had a dream. Then in 2000, when I was 12 years old, I escaped from North Korea for the first time. I had the opportunity to attend a regular school in China. However, after attending for about 6 months, someone reported me, and I was caught by the Chinese police during class and detained in Chinese prison. And I was repatriated to North Korea after 38 days of detention. I was 14 at this time. Afterwards, I lived in North Korea and escaped again in 2004 after 2 attempts. My mother, who settled in South Korea first, helped me. My motivation for coming to South Korea was clear. It was for studying. I desperately wanted to study, and I knew that there was a better life if I could at least escape North Korea. And so I chose to escape. So after coming to South Korea, I concentrated on my studies, and currently I'm engaged in various activities as a writer and columnist and more.
Well, that's good to hear. Then, as a defector and a millennial yourself, what are your thoughts on the current South-North relations?
Well, it can be said that there is no relationship in the current inter-Korean relations. There is no attempt to and dialogue between the North and South. Since the current Yoon government has consistently maintained a hardline policy toward North Korea, and even before it came to power, there has been no attempt. The same applies to North Korea after the failure of the North Korea and US summit in Hanoi. The Kim Jong-un regime decided that there was no practical benefit to dialogue and switched it to a hardline policy. Since the Biden administration also had no particular interest in improving North Korea-US relations, there were no attempts to create momentum for dialogue between South Korea and North Korea and United States. Meanwhile, North Korea conducted several missile tests and become a de facto nuclear weapons state. Now the terms of dialogue and transactions themselves have changed compared to Hanoi summit. Due to the failure of the Hanoi summit, we will maybe probably have to pay more than twice the cost or put in more work. First, I think it is time for the current Yoon administration to seek changes in its North Korea policy. However, the current stance is that there will be no changes in policy toward North Korea. In effect, it's adhering to the policy of maintaining the status quo. It's the same in the US. There was virtually no attempts to make any changes in the North Korea and US relationship. North Korea continues to emphasize that it is also a normal nation. We have now reached a situation where we must have dialogue with North Korea as a normal nation, not with a rogue country. I think the big deal is still valid. There is a need to start the inter-Korean dialogue and the North Korea and US dialogue as a normal nation versus normal nation. Currently, the most urgent priority is to eliminate the risk of war between North and South Korea and between North and US. I think the Korean government needs to consider this more seriously now.
Okay, Kyung-il, so moving on to the next question. Do you think the younger generation in North Korea and the way they perceive their regime has affected Kim Jong-un's leadership and even further the two Koreas' relations?
Well, it seems right that the Kim Jong-un regime is paying attention to the young generation more than in the past. But however, this does not further strengthen Kim Jong-un's leadership. The current young generation in North Korea is clearly different from their parents' generation. they are the market generation. These are young people who lived and experienced the market economy firsthand. I'm also a first market generation. In fact, North Korea's current bottom economy can be considered as an early capitalist market economy. People are relying on the market, not our rations. Therefore, Kim Jong-un is also well aware of this. So Kim Jong-un also pays attention to the market generation to some extent. However, at the same time, also the dictatorship of fear continues again. The U.S. remains a powerful external enemy. But recently, Korea and South Korea has been defined as the biggest enemy. It is not North Korea's young generation that influences the leadership of the Kim Jong-un regime, but changes in the external environment and international relations. Simply put, I think leadership is affected by changes in North Korea, U.S., and North and South relations. As economic sanctions against North Korea continue, the internal economy of North Korea has become very difficult. Therefore, internal dissatisfaction also increased as a result while pursuing a reign of the terror for internal unity.
Right.
They are also pursuing a hardline policy for external politics.
Right. As you mentioned, Kyung-il, I do think it's up to the external environment to change in order for us to see a breakthrough in Korea's relations. Now, thank you so much. It was a pleasure hearing from you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And in hopes to see some changes in the peninsula, how would you two like to see South Korea and North Korea relations go from now on?
Well, first of all, I do understand that it's not very plausible at this point, and I would be an idealist to say that, oh, we're going to unify soon. And not many millennials and Gen Zs would like to see that as well. But I'm happy that at least our generation, they're not so much interested in the political or power play between the two countries, but they do seem to be interested in the soft side, like the culture and the human rights issues.
Yeah.
And I want this sort of perception and the interest to grow a lot more so that we can at least have these humanitarian exchanges, economic exchanges going forward.
And though Kyung-il emphasized that it could be a top to bottom effect or a tripling down effect where the government takes changes, I do think it's up to our generation to voice out our concerns and the demands that North Korean residents are feeling at the moment, because that could shape our administration or our government's policies in regards to North Korea. Now, Sang-yeon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so like Jay said, we can go for cultural exchange first, like we did during the previous Moon administration. Meanwhile, when it comes to the diplomacy and the relations with the North, I do understand that there will be some bumpy roads ahead. Because as Kyung-il mentioned, inside North Korea, there is indeed a generation change within the regime. And also when you think about the external factors, the US, Korea, and Japan as well are all taking hardline approach towards the North. And as for our country's generation, it is true that the millennials and Gen Zs are kind of negligible when it comes to inter-Korean relations, unlike the older generation where these people were exposed to the separated families and all these issues. Meanwhile, our generation is rather
A bit more nonchalant.
a bit more nonchalant regarding those issues. So I think it will take some time for us to recover the relations with the North in terms of military or diplomacy. But if we take the power of soft powers and the culture, then there will be some light ahead.
And hopefully today's episode shed light to what needs to be done in order to see some breakthrough or a turning point. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Im Sang-yeon.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are News Generation.